It was a cliche that popped up in just about every cop movie, and Harry had sworn to himself that he would never utter these words. But I'm getting too old for this. He really was. There came a point in a man's life where he wanted to stop chasing bad guys and focus on his family. The court decision that had taken his kids away certainly didn't help matters. Della's lawyers had argued that, as a police officer, Harry was often required to go into dangerous situations, and that he would be unable to provide a stable environment for his children. The sad thing about a lawyer's argument was that it didn't have to be true. It just had to be convincing. Now, he had to share custody with his ex-wife. Raindrops pattered against the windshield of his car, streaking over the glass in thin trails of moisture, each one catching the orange light of passing street lamps. A murder at a convenience store. The last time that had happened, he'd still been a uniformed cop. Harry stared through the glass, blinking as he considered the situation. "Lewis says the clerk was flattened," he said, clenching the steering wheel. "Crushed against the wall like he'd been hit by a truck." He glanced over his shoulder. Jack Hunter sat in the passenger seat with his head down, a frown on his youthful face. "You're thinking force field generator?" he muttered. "Or some other form of illegal Leyrian gadgetry?" Harry pressed his lips together, nodding with every syllable. "Can you think of any other weapon that can do that?" he asked, eyebrows rising. "Seems to me like we got a smuggling problem." Chewing on his lower lip, Jack stared down into his lap. He squinted, shaking his head. Maybe," he admitted. "But it's also likely that some of the crap Petrov put on the streets is still in circulation." Harry knew they had arrived when he spotted a line of people, most of them in their early 20s, standing on the sidewalk with their backs turned. It was a staple of the human condition that people would want to get a good look at the mayhem wherever it happened. They pulled into a lot where 4 gas pumps stood in front of a small convenience store with a big yellow sign above the door. Windows that looked in on aisles full of gum, candy, and potato chips had been shattered, and yellow police tape formed a large square around the front entrance. Harry got out of the car. Dressed in the same slacks and dark shirt, he made his way toward the crime scene with a jacket slung over his shoulder. "All right, give me a status update," he said as he drew near. "What do we know?" 2 uniformed officers stood just inside the doorway with their backs turned, both tapping out reports on tablets. "Detective," Lewis said, turning around. We're still looking the place over." The guy was an older fellow with creases in his forehead and silver hair that poked out from under the brim of his cap. "Paramedics are looking over the body," Lewis said with a curt nod. "By the time we got here, the clerk was dead." Harry gritted his teeth, wincing so hard that his temples throbbed. "All right, let me take a look," he muttered. "Get Roberts and Smith out on the sidewalk. I want statements." "Right." The place was a wreck, with shelves toppled over and candy bars strewn across the white-tiled floor. An open register sat unattended with absolutely nothing inside the cash drawer. Cigarettes that would have lined the wall behind the counter had been pilfered. So much for a smoke-free Ontario. The clerk, a young man with pale skin and thick curly hair, was indeed crushed into the wall. Wireframe shelves dented where his body had made contact. Bags of chips were scattered on the floor in a pool of the man's blood. Jack approached on his right and very nearly retched at the sight of the body. It was a force field," he managed, raising his multi-tool for inspection. "I'm detecting a residual electrostatic charge." A pair of paramedics stood off to the side with solemn expressions. They were too late to do anything for the man, and they didn't want to risk contaminating the scene of a homicide. A rather ugly homicide. Biting his lower lip, Harry shut his eyes. He let his head hang, trying to ignore the queasiness in his stomach. "All right, so, Forcefield," he said. "Someone decided to turn a robbery into a murder."